this video is going to be me reading this piece that I wrote, 18 Universal Spiritual Principles. I'm not going to tell you where it's from. If you're new to this channel, kind of just dropping in, it'll be a little experiment to see if this resonates with you at all. What resonates, what doesn't resonate with you, what accords with your own beliefs, your own tradition. At the end, I'll tell you where it's from. But if you just want to listen and see what feels right to you, what doesn't, based on what you already believe. Okay, so number one, this is 18 Universal Spiritual Principles. Number one, freedom from suffering. True spirituality is freedom from suffering. But such freedom generally comes via some kind of spiritual practice that requires our full intention and attention. So in other words, we free ourselves from suffering by doing something, some kind of practice, some kind of discipline. Number two, actionless action. We are all merely actors in the great play of life. If we act with this awareness that we are simply playing our part, we will free ourselves from suffering. So we act with the understanding that we're not running the show. And Shakespeare, this goes back to Shakespeare, but also, it's an ancient idea, really. It's a really old idea. Learning to let go. True spirituality is a letting go, which is to let go of selfish motive and attachment to what we do and what we are in a limited sense, remembering that our ego is not running the show. We relearn this by learning to unlearn the way of selfish action and reaction. In effect, we let life be what it is rather than trying to force it to be what it is not. So letting go. The practice really is learning how to let go, right? Letting go of attachment, letting go of the feeling of ownership, the feeling of authority, the feeling that I am running the show, or my ego is running the show, or you want things to be according to how you think they should be, which basically ends in some kind of suffering. So learning to let go. Number four, our true self is unchanging. The way to understanding and wisdom is through a process of separating out what is real from what is unreal, or similarly put, the false from the true. Our real, true self is one and has never changed, and that self is the self of all. So this is a very profound idea that our true self, not our ego self, but our true eternal self, the immortal self, has never changed, and it is the self that we all share, right? That is everyone. Principle 5. Cultivating the higher mind. We can better do this work of separating out what is true from what is false by cultivating our higher mind, which is that higher faculty that is able to discern and thus choose between those two basic options: real versus unreal, true versus false, love versus fear. In other words, our higher mind is that faculty of discernment and discrimination that enables us to make wiser and wiser choices. So we have this higher mind, right? We have this ability to discern or to discriminate between what is true and what is false, what is real and what is unreal, what is useful and what is not useful, what is helpful and what is not helpful, what is loving and what is of fear, etc., right? And through that cultivating the higher mind, we grow in wisdom. Principle 6, you become what you focus on. Wherever you place your focus and attention determines what you are becoming and where you are going. If you seek the highest and concentrate your efforts there, that is what will manifest in you. Eventually, you will be fully established in your true and natural state of being. So as you focus more and more on finding your higher self, understanding your higher self, that is what will manifest in you. 7, the enemy within, enemy in quotations. There is nothing outside of you that is really your enemy or friend. Everything is actually neutral and is determined by how you see. Thus, all dualistic concepts, such as friend versus foe, are just that, mental concepts that have no ultimate reality. Number 8, the eternal way. There is a way out of suffering, and it has been discovered by all true spiritual seekers throughout time, those rare souls who have gone all the way in their pursuit of truth. No one religion or spiritual tradition has an exclusive claim to being the one and only true way. Rather, every path can be a valid one if practiced sincerely. So there is a way. There are many paths, and you could say there's really only one. they all end up in the same place, but there is a way that has been discovered by those who have sought it in every generation throughout time. And they tend to be the minority, but there are people, right, that have gone all the way and understood the meaning of life, right, the meaning of existence. Number 9, God is everywhere. God is in all things, but all things are not in God. Until you let God in, you will not know God's reality. This also means that you do not have to go anywhere special or do anything extraordinary to know God, or what we might better term, quote, ultimate reality. You can just as well find that in the midst of mundane life as you can meditating in a forest or a cave. So you don't have to go anywhere special. You don't have to go to a monastery. You don't have to go to an ashram. You don't have to go to a cave to find God. That might be helpful to a certain degree, but the reality is that if God is everywhere, it's really a matter of letting God in, right? Letting the light in, opening the doors. Number 10, the middle way, connected to the previous idea, is the idea of finding the middle way, the way between extremes, the way of balance. To be in the exalted state of equipoise or equanimity means choosing to remain, quote, indifferent, unquote, to the apparent differences that are endemic to the realm of duality. Any extreme in thinking or acting will tend to upset one's natural state of balance and peace. All right, so we have to find the middle way between the extremes, and that is really the way of wisdom. Number 11, eliminating selfish emotions. And connected to that idea is this: there are emotional states based in biological drives that are essentially in the way of realizing one's eternal immortal reality. The principal emotional entanglements in question are anger, lust, and greed, but really all desire and attachment, clinging to any fixed belief or state of mind, can take one away from the simplicity of one's true nature / self. So in other words, you have to get beyond the biology, right? Get beyond the body, get beyond the emotions. Emotions are not bad, but they also hide the fact that we are more than our body, that we are not a physical, ultimately our true self is not a physical thing. And so we have to rise above, right? Rise above our biology, rise above our human condition, which is based in biology. Number 12, God is both in form and formless. God can take infinite forms and will meet each person in whatever form is most helpful to them. At the same time, God's true reality is nameless, formless, and unmanifest, because no name or form can truly comprehend what God is. And then I wrote in parentheses, we might better refer to God as Gob, the ground of being. So God is ultimately without name and without form, but God can take any form, right? God can appear in any form that would be helpful to those who are seeking God, right? Number 13, easier to worship God in form. That said, for we who are in form, in bodies, it's quite difficult for us to think of God in the abstract, and it's far easier to approach God in some form that shares many of the attributes and aspects of our humanity. This is thus not the highest approach, but it is the easiest for us, and it will eventually lead to the higher understanding of God as nameless and formless, an unchanging reality beyond the world of duality. So this is the idea that it's actually easier to think of God as having a form for most of us, right? It's harder to think of God in the abstract. It's harder to approach God as an abstraction or as not a person or not a being. It's hard to think of God as a beingness, right? So it's kind of like we might have to think of God as having a form or having a personality, and that would help us to go beyond that. Principle 14, paths are many, truth is one. Connected to the two previous ideas is the idea that there are any number of paths that can lead to the knowledge of God, and one is not necessarily better than the other. It is more a matter of how it suits the individual's needs. All paths will lead to God in the end, right? And God here is ultimate reality, right? If you don't like the word God, you can say ultimate reality or your true self or the true self. It's just to say that there are many paths to get there, and there are many valid paths. What works for one person might not work for another person. And so we can't judge anyone else's path, right? Whatever path someone is on is their path. And we ultimately have to get beyond the judgment. Number 15, beyond duality, those who are truly wise and fully embody the truth of existence are beyond the dualities of life. Pain and pleasure, loss and gain, praise and blame, as they have realized the, quote, oneness, unquote, that lies beyond them. They thus are not deluded by the changing play of the illusion of life. They see the true self in all and all in the self. They live free from fear, suffering, and grief, and have risen above the human condition. So the wise, those who have passed over, have transcended the world, they go beyond the duality of the world, and they are not affected by dualities. They are in the middle, that middle point, right? They reside in the center. Maybe the center is the better word. Centered. They're centered in the self. 16, beyond illusion. When we are caught up in the changing forms of life, we are deluded in ignorance of our true self, which is to say that we are identifying with the illusion of what we are versus identifying with our eternal, unchanging reality. In order to free ourselves from our delusion, we must make a concerted effort to reverse this so that we prioritize the reality over the illusion. In effect, we have everything backwards and upside down until we do some kind of inner work or practice to undo this state of affairs. So we have to go beyond the illusion of life and beyond the appearances. Everything in this world is upside down and backwards. And in order to go beyond the illusion, we have to reverse that somehow. And that's a practice, right? We have to do some sort of practice, some kind of spiritual practice. Number 17, dissolution of ego. A limited sense of self is in the way of our highest goals and aspirations, and it's possible to be free of selfishness in all its forms, even in this world, though it is a relatively rare phenomenon. When one lets go of all other limiting desires and attaches solely to that one desire, the desire for liberation, one will go on a journey that will help one to work through any limitation that is in the way. The ego will be dissolved and suffering will be gone, to be replaced by a constant joyful presence. So you can basically more or less dissolve your ego even while you're here in this world, right? Even while you're here, the ego can basically be out of the way. Now you still are in the world, and you need the ego. As long as you're here in this world, the ego serves its purpose, but the ego is not, you don't take the ego seriously, right? The ego does not bring suffering. You do not feel guilt, you do not feel shame, you do not feel sinful, you're not suffering, right? You're not in a place of dis-ease. You still have an ego, but you are you're free, right? The ego is more or less out of the way. 18, merging with God. Once one has arrived at this place of freedom by one's practice, one has fulfilled the conditions necessary to know the ultimate reality of existence, which is familiarly termed God. This is a place beyond concepts, beyond duality, beyond separation, beyond all fear and grief. It is not even separate from oneself. It is merely a return to one's eternal reality that has never changed. So merging with God is really merging with your true self, which is the self of all, which is, the one reality, the ultimate reality. And you can't get there until you do the practices necessary to remove what is in the way, right? You're removing the interference. So those are the 18 principles. If you found that resonant, then let me just say this is coming from the Bhagavad Gita, I wrote this based on the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. It's also very much in line with the Course in Miracles. In some ways, it's guided by a Course in Miracles because I've looked at the Bhagavad Gita through the lens of a Course in Miracles. The Bhagavad Gita has a lot of other things in it that are maybe more, Hindu, like specifically Hindu, or not as universal, right? Things that are more specific to the Hindu tradition. But what I did here was I took what is more universal, the universal spiritual principles that can apply to anyone at any time in any place. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you are a student of the Gita, if you'd like to add anything, if you're a student of Course in Miracles, if you'd like to add anything. 18 is kind of arbitrary. 18 is kind of a magic number. 18 is, there are 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, so I chose 18. But I'm sure I left some important things out, but I tried to include what I thought were some of the most, essential. And should I make this video 18 minutes? We're getting close to the 18-minute mark. Maybe we'll go to 18 minutes here. It has been pointed out, and I think it's true that A Course in Miracles is very much in line with Hindu philosophy. And some people say Buddhist as well. And it's a question of, like, what is the difference really between Buddhism and Hinduism, right? And is there such a huge difference that they're different, they're completely different traditions? Because Buddhism started in India, and it was started by a Hindu, just like Christianity was started by a Jew, right? And it started in Palestine. So, but then it spread to the rest of the world, and same with Buddhism spread. It actually got out of India at a certain point, and it spread to the other countries of the Far East, especially China and Japan. So it's an interesting thing, but the point I wanted to make is that the Course in Miracles has a lot in common with Vedanta, with the Hindu Vedanta, and with Hindu philosophy in general, and also with Buddhist principles as well. And that would be a whole nother video. I have done some videos on that, but I also want to do a video on Shankara and Adi Shankaracharya and how he apparently tried to get rid of Buddhism from India in the 8th century. And that's something I'd like to learn more about myself. So we're getting to the 18 mark. Thank you for listening. See you soon.